You're a delegation. You're you're mostly good at. You were fine once we prize something away from you. You're okay with it. Hello, and welcome to the PriceWriters Podcast with Catrin and me, Jeremy Keating. Join us as we explore and discuss the world of insurance-related books, offering our insight and recommendations. It's April, so a lot of people will be starting new roles or looking for a new job. So today we're talking about how to start strong with Lead Your Team in Your First 100 Days by Neve O'Keeffe. Catrin, tell us what it's all about.
It does what it says on the tin, which is give a practical guide for team leaders who are starting a new role. And the book is split into different sections based on time. So it's all one big timeline. The beginning section obviously is what to do before you start your role. Then it talks about your first 30 days, first 60 days, and 60 days. The next check-in is 90 days, and then it's the final sprint to the 100 days. And she works on this 7-part success formula. And when she's talking about being a leader, what she's really talking about is being a role model, being a mission setter, being a recruiter, a communicator, a motivator, a skills builder, and a target maker. And particularly in the first 30 days, she says you really need to be thinking about all of these different areas and then pulling out the ones in the 60, 90, and 100 days that need a little bit more focus for your exact team situation. So she uses these 7 as a holistic view of what a leader is. And I thought this was really good. I thought it was really good to break down leadership into that way, because so often we think of it as just soft skills. And I think she's really put names to what soft skills we're trying to build here. And this isn't all of them. She doesn't talk about stakeholder management, for example. She doesn't give you lots of presentation tips. But I think what she's done really well is try to distill what you need to lead your team. And of course, everyone is both a team leader and they're also a team member. And they're also a peer of other team leaders. So we all have all these different roles. But I think just by focusing on the what do you need as a leader, she gives a really nice focus and a good way of working out what's missing and what you're not quite doing as much of. It made me reflect on which ones I find easiest, but I'm really interested in your views. Which do you think most pricing leaders naturally gravitate to, and which one do we tend to overlook?
Yeah, it's a bit recruiter, isn't it? And a bit target maker, wouldn't you say?
The things we tend to overlook?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you. Yeah, maybe mission set is the one we actually do. Yeah. What would you say?
I think recruiter is sometimes the hardest one because it involves having difficult conversations.
Yeah.
So when she talks about being a recruiter, she means not just working with HR to secure the resource you need, but also
Right.
looking at the resource you currently have and doing any performance management, that kind of thing. And I know from my experience that first 30, 60 days is really the time to
Yeah.
deal with those issues. If people have got a bad attitude or they're so evidently underperforming so early on, then that kind of is an indication that you might have to deal with it. And I think that a lot of managers think, well, maybe they'll get better under a new leader. So I'm just going to
That's
leave
true.
that a little bit, particularly if I'm leaving. So I think that's a common attitude. And that means that new leaders come in and sometimes have people concerns or people performance issues that they need to resolve fairly early on. And so I think that's the first one that we overlook. When she talks about the section on recruiting, she also talks about not being pushed by HR into long timelines, into we'll just wait and see, or, well, we need to go through a long process of securing the budget and blah, 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 and go
Yeah.
through this process, internal first, all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
She is quite assertive on, if I need people, I actually want them to be in role within the first 100 days as well, so that we're not always in this place of having to build and onboard a team. Her idea is that by the end of your 100 days, you have a functioning team that is galvanized, that is well bonded, not just between the leader and the existing people, but that is going to be your team for the medium term, if not the long term. So I think that's pretty tricky for people in big organizations where there's often the cogs of governance and HR sometimes run slow.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're probably stronger in the role model space, actually. And I think maybe that's a mistake some of us make in, like, we're modeling how to be a good analyst when we actually should be leading. So I think often probably a lot of us fall into this role model space where it's like, if I'm the most technical, if I'm really brilliant at being technical, people will think I'm a great manager. And that's just not true. It's patently not true, actually. But I think a lot of people fall into that trap. I feel like I have to know the most. I have to be the best with the tools. I have to be the best at Python, be taken seriously as someone that can lead other people doing that work. And that is a mistake that I think an awful lot of us make, certainly when we're new into it. But actually, I'd say even 2, 3 or plus years in, there's still people who are heads of teams who think they ought to be the most technical, and they're making a mistake. They're going down the wrong path. They're going to cap their careers off and get stuck at a particular level. So I would say we probably have this habit of being role model. I would agree with you. I think recruiter, target maker are all things that we find quite hard. Some of us like sharing our skills. So skills building might be sort of in between, in the middle, where sometimes we're kind of okay. I think motivation, we can find a bit hard, actually. We're kind of lucky in a way that a lot of us really love what we do. So our analysts are already quite highly motivated and often really into solving the problems. So when we do have a motivation problem, it can really hit us in the face, actually. And we're just like, oh, how do I deal with this person? They're not working. They're not working hard. They're not engaged in the role. I've never had this problem before. What do I do? And can be actually a real shock to us because it's something that probably doesn't happen early on in our careers. So it can be quite a surprise when we suddenly have to deal with motivating. Communicating, we aren't always the best at, though some of us do build relationships, but certainly the first 100 days is probably quite hard to be good in that box. I'm feeling like I can think of a particular time when I could have done with a book like this. So I moved to France and took over a relatively small team over there. But I had to build it out quite quickly and deal with a different culture at the same time. And I would say that there are places where I can, everyone could do this assessment after the fact. There are lots of places where I think I made mistakes or I could have been better and I'd do it differently now. So I think that's what I would say. I'd say we tend to be doing the role model, the skills builder, and maybe we fall down on the other ones.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're definitely the ones that we don't get as much help and guidance on. What is really good about this book is that she tells you exactly how to do these things, exactly what to say. She gives lots of examples of missions that you can use, although actually if you want some more insurance pricing specific examples of that, check out my podcast with Julia Lessing. So when I went on Julia Lessing's podcast in March 2025, we talked a lot about missions. So I gave you my pricing manager mission statement in that podcast. But yeah, she gives you exact wording on what to do, on how to run the review workshop after the first 30 days, that kind of thing. She is very practical and gives a lot of really helpful application of what she's saying, which I really like in this. But she also tells you what not to do, which is often helpful as well. The downside of this book is that it's not very introspective. And as pricing people, we probably are quite introspective in a lot of ways. She doesn't talk about using your natural strengths particularly. She kind of briefly mentions what kind of leader are you, what kind of leader do you want to be, but it's very early on and it's kind of like a paragraph. People who are kind of mid to later on in their careers do have a wealth of experience from, different products, different projects, even maybe different parts of the industry we've worked in, and thinking about how we can bring those skills to this role, to whatever new role you're doing. She doesn't really talk about that a lot. So I think that's kind of missing. I think the other thing that's not missing, but it's just not very realistic for insurance, at least, is that the first couple of chapters are about what to do before your first 100 days. So the time between you've got the job, you've signed the contract, and your first day. And she talks a lot about things to email your team and introduce yourself, things you should request from your team. So you should tell them before you even join that you want them to do this presentation about themselves and their skills and their ideas and things like that. So you can listen to those on the first or second day. Things you should request from your company about company targets, financials. It's not realistic for insurance companies because we have garden leave or we have notice periods where you are still locked into your previous company. And to be honest, even if you're not in those positions, insurance companies just won't want to share that with you on an unsecured email address. So there's quite a lot in there that for me feels like you just wouldn't be able to do. So you'd have to end up doing like 110 days or something, I don't know, to try and fit that part of the work in from when you start your role as well. The premise is all about your first 100 days. And so I think that's kind of, for me, where it becomes a bit of a pressure point if you aren't able to do the pre-work before you join the role. What is interesting is that it's actually 100 calendar days, not 100 work days.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay, so it's 3 actual months and a bit.
Yeah,
Okay.
3 months, basically.
Right. Okay. 1 quarter to come in. I would say
Yeah.
that's probably quite tricky because there's so much. And you're right for exactly the reasons you've just mentioned. So you're simultaneously learning the ropes and you're meant to be running a team. It can be pretty difficult to slot in. And it gets harder the higher up you go, actually. And if you slot in as a director, or even a head of, you're very much expected to start answering questions before you've even really got your feet under the table.
Yeah, it felt a lot to me, even if you were able to do the pre-work, to get in, to get to know your team, to galvanize your team, to set an initial target and then achieve that target. She says in your first 100 days, you should set a team target and actually achieve that. So whatever target is has to be realistic within that 100 days. But yeah, it feels a lot to do, particularly if there are existing projects on the go or existing BAU to be done. It did feel a bold target. Do you think that is realistic? Even with a great team already in place, well-resourced, and in a role that isn't too new to someone in terms of project experience and things. Do you think it's realistic?
I think it's one of those times where the book probably works for a lot of people in a lot of their types of roles, but doesn't necessarily match us that. So I can see if you run a call center or if you're a manager in a call center or a sales team and so on, it's often more clear from day one what you need to achieve. And I don't mean this as a criticism, but it can be quite hard to even discern objectives in a very big organization with a pricing team when you've just arrived. Because for a time, a lot of work was being done by other people or other teams and so on. There's often a lot of rejigging when you come in. and you are personally responsible for your delivery. But oddly enough, as numbers people, we often struggle to set very clear, like smart targets on people for their delivery, which is an interesting catch 22 in itself as to why we don't do that. So I would probably say no. I don't see that as being that realistic for someone coming into a sort of manager, head of, or director role in a pricing team.
And we've talked about targets before in this podcast, where if you set numerical targets, it's very easy to show that you have or have not hit those targets.
Mm.
With pricing teams, you're only responsible for the price if you are very senior in the organization and
Yeah.
you control the risk pricing, the street pricing, the optimization, the portfolio management. If you can control all of those things, relationships with your aggregators or price comparison websites, your brokers, maybe if you're in that role, you're sufficiently high up, you do control all those things, you can be responsible for the price. But otherwise, it's very difficult to prove that you've hit your pricing target. And that's even before we get to questions about if the target is profitable growth, then what does that even mean?
Mm.
And that today's results are actually from last year's pricing. And so you could make the best pricing in this 100 days, but you're actually not going to start feeling the benefit of that properly for quite some time.
Mm.
I think those things I think particularly with targets, it does feel really difficult. And I actually think that's why the mission statement part of the role is so important, because if your mission is about building statistically strong models, meeting your stakeholder needs, and it might also be something like research or automation or process improvement, something in that realm as well. There aren't necessarily targets of, if you automate your process, you might save a day a week or something like that. But it's quite hard to know what you're going to save before you've actually started that project. So
Yeah.
I think there's some
I
of the issues.
I agree with you there. And I would say as well, it links in interesting with the things we talked about with the 12-week year. A lot of objectives in an insurer are annual. So I would say it just doesn't line up very well with how we operate in our companies. And I'm not saying we couldn't operate better, but I'm just saying it's not going to really work in how most organizations actually operate.
I do still think it's a good idea, though. You only get one chance to make a first impression.
True.
And a lot of her point is around, if you can really nail this first 100 days, your team is on board with what you're doing and they are clear with what they're doing and they feel motivated and a bit of a morale boost from having achieved a smaller target, you're going to be a lot better placed to deliver whatever comes after that 100 days. Equally, your boss, your stakeholders, whatever level you're at, they're also going to see, okay, well, they've come in, they've got good control over their team already. They're receptive to what other people in the business need. And I can see that they get stuff done. And that's a really good start, I guess. So we don't think the 100 days is realistic, which is only a minor flaw in a book called Lead Your Team in the First 100 Days. But is there anything we can do to make this more realistic or to help people who are being put in these situations? They're parachuted in to a new team. They're under a lot of pressure to actually deliver, to turn something around really quickly. What can be done?
Yeah, I think whether it's right or wrong, insurance companies just naturally do move quite slowly. I know that can be frustrating to people, but the reality is it's not like selling e-commerce. We're selling what is effectively a relationship that typically lasts a year or could be longer with a customer. And then settling claims can take years after that. So we naturally move slowly because of the nature of our business. It's not because we're big lumbering oil tanker organizations. It's a failure to understand our business often causes people to think we move slowly. So I'll just defend us in that way for once. It can actually be really difficult when you first arrive in a role to even assess your team. So you might well get told some handover information about who's good at this and who's good at that and so on, but it's often not very structured. it's often quite subjective what people tell you. And sometimes I've known people who perhaps haven't had the best of, I've not been told the best things about, but I've actually found to be really good at their roles, and vice versa. Actually, I've sometimes found people that are rated quite highly who I felt haven't actually delivered. So it can be quite difficult coming in, even in a couple of months, to actually get used to what people are and aren't good at.
I think for that reason, it's really important that there is some objective way of assessing skills. And, at PriceWriters, we have a capability audit where we can objectively assess skills that are relevant for you and your team, and for multiple teams if you want to see a more holistic view. Because I think the danger is if you don't do that objectively, or you just take that subjective information as the truth, is that people who fairly or unfairly had a poor relationship with the previous manager, or people who have improved a lot. Maybe they've only been enrolled for a fairly short amount of time, so people still see them as the newbie, even if they have grown a lot since then. But the other place I see this is in senior analysts a lot, where they started in the company as graduates. Everyone still thinks of them as the graduate, the person who can crank the handle. Even though they have really good leadership or management potential, they're still thought of as the graduate. And so that people don't give them a chance for more leadership or more of a step up. So I think there are some real risks if you only go on that subjective assessment, or if you make snap judgment. Things like the person who wears a suit is the most qualified, the best at that role, or that person is the management potential. That's not true. I mean, that's so patently not true, but it still is something that I hear and that I genuinely do see people have that perception in insurers right now.
We've all had situations where the quietest person in the team's been the most productive, and the best at promoting themselves has not been the best at the actual work. I think that's probably something that occurs to people. So it is important to have an objective view of people's skills as well, because somebody at arm's reach might only see how they present, and they might be very good at presenting, but actually that might not mean they're very good at doing the work. So often getting under the hood of this and working out who's right for which roles and who's right for promotion, what their gaps are, so what they really ought to be learning about. And sometimes that can differ to what people even themselves think is the areas they want to learn about. So we alluded to it earlier, but there comes a level where learning more Python is not going to help you advance in the organization. Sad as that is, because we all love learning Python, but we need to learn more about people in order to advance, and how to, and management and organization, which sometimes doesn't come naturally to a lot of us. So actually, I would say coming in, being able to outsource and get some objective views on the capabilities in the team, and also get that training, get plugging those gaps and working out where we need to help people in a system and actually developing further, and then provide that help. So I think we can all probably relate to times where we've been given a PDP that says something like, I think you need to improve your impact analysis skills. It's like, okay, great. But there's nothing to actually do that with other than doing some more impact analysis. If you don't get anyone telling you how to do it better, it's not going to make you better at doing it. It's just going to involve you doing it again and again and again. And actually, there does tend to be an attitude of, if you just do it more, you'll get better at it. And that there's some element of truth in that, but I would say it's a bit like a line like that, where it's getting some education in it could be a line like that or more. So I think that's important to realize when you actually have people in your team, you assess their abilities and you need them to improve and you want them to do it quickly, so you're doing better in the role, getting that outside training is essential.
Yeah, and the one thing that I think with the 7-part success formula she uses is how interconnected they are. You are not going to be able to recruit effectively if you haven't got a good assessment of what people's skills currently are and what skills you're missing by definition.
Mm.
But you're not going to be able to do that skills assessment very helpfully if you personally, as a leader, don't have a very clear mission for your team.
Mhm.
And that mission is also going to inform your targets. But also, if you can't communicate why that mission is important to people, that they're not going to want to learn. So I think that those are all interconnected. But the other thing is, like you say about role modeling this, if you say to people, you should go and learn something, but you as the leader aren't investing in your growth as well.
Mm.
Because, getting to know your team and bonding with your team is a two-way experience for sure. Then they're not going to believe that, then you're not going to be credible as a role model if you're yourself not applying those same standards. So I,
Yeah, if I can be a bit blunt there, how many of us have been told that we need to work on like influencing skills by people who are pretty bad at that, actually? So I think that's quite interesting. I think we can all relate to times where where things that we've been told we need to improve, we're perhaps being told by, and that's often the person we're meant to learn from.
yeah. Okay. All right. So although we could probably share some horror stories on that,
We
what
best not.
we
People
best
know
not.
what it is.
What is the best thing you recall a new leader coming in and doing in their initial 3 months that just really impressed you?
All right, this time I'm going to name check someone. So I remember Richard Breton quite a few years ago now taking over as pricing leader in a newly formed department post reorganization. And he just got a handle on it really quickly. I think it's very impressive how well he did in that, actually.
Is there anything specifically you recall him doing that you think helped get a handle on it?
Yeah, taking the time to get to know the team. That's a really big one. Obviously, it was a big change for a lot of people. There was high levels of uncertainty. There were jobs that hadn't been filled. People were moving into new roles. And if you are head of a department that's been through a reorganization and you are somebody's boss's boss, it's still worth taking half an hour to talk to the individuals in the team, even when it's a lot of people. That will make a big difference to how the team operates. And so I think it was really that, actually getting to know the people in the team quickly and getting a handle on it was something that just really impressed me. The thing also with Richard, he won't mind me saying that he is somebody who very much invests in skills building. And I actually remember very particularly, he sent everyone on a training course straight away. And it was a couple of days training. That's a lot of people to send on a training course. It was a lot of money that was invested. But actually, if I can be careful what I say, I'll just say that the previous management, perhaps across the whole organization, had maybe not indicated to people enough that investing in your development matters. And it was one of these cases where there were some people on the actuarial team who get lots and lots of money spent at them. And most people were not on the actuarial team, and the actuaries were sucking up all the training budget. And I'm sure few of us can relate to situations like that.
All right. So we'll finish up by saying that I definitely do recommend this book. I recommend this book if you are in that situation. You're about to move roles. I would ideally try and read it before you start your role. And she actually says at the beginning, she says, the way to read this book is to read it all on one train journey, like all in one go, just whip through it. And then go back and reread the section you need when you need it. And it honestly, it really was not that long. It took me a return journey to London, so about an hour it took me. It's like 150 pages, pretty big font actually, which is nice. So read it all. And then when you need it, read the right section slightly ahead. So I do recommend this if you're in that situation. Or if you feel like there's one of these 7 that you just don't really know how to implement. I think that's also really important if you're not just in your new role, but also if there has been a restructure and you're left with a new team or a team that is new in the sense of you've got a new mission or you've had a big churn of people. So I actually think that this book is probably one that I would buy actually, and just keep on my shelf for any future new roles. So I actually do really, really like this one.
I'm worried about the phrase future new roles, but I think I'll probably get a copy as well. I can literally think of a time in my career where something like this would have been really helpful.
Mhm. I would say one of the other downsides with it, though, is that she has a consultancy called First 100 Days. And this book mentions in a lot of places, oh, you should get a first 100 days consultant. And
Yeah.
while that may or may not be true, and most teams, let's be honest, don't have the budget for a special first 100 days consultant, right? I do think there's a lot of really good stuff in this book that you can use just as it is. You just might want to skip over all the trademarks. Every time she says first 100 days, it's trademarked and it's just a little bit hard to read. But apart from that, I really recommend this book.
So that's fantastic, Catrin. So a big recommend for us and a book that I'm going to be buying myself. Excellent. Well, join us next time on the PriceWriters podcast when I am going to be talking about a book called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. This is one I've read a couple of times. I'm doing a reread at the moment. It's all about delegation. And let's be honest, a lot of us in pricing could benefit from learning more about delegation. So I'll look forward to telling you all about that next time.
I feel personally called out by that.
PriceWriters transforms pricing professionals into the most respected leaders in insurance. Find out more about our capability audits by visiting pricewriters.com.